Hey guys, Pat here. This is my review of Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. The interesting thing about Dunkirk is that Americans aren't as familiar with it, for obvious reasons, as the British. And I never thought there would be this big budget Hollywood movie about Dunkirk at all. It just never occurred to me that would happen. Now, don't get me wrong, when Christopher Nolan wants to make $100 million film about something, it happens. But the interesting thing here is, I remember that movie Atonement had like that one tracking shot at Dunkirk, and I thought, oh, okay, cool, that's probably going to be the biggest set piece we ever see about Dunkirk in a movie. And it's very nice. But yeah, Nolan just went even further completely with that, and in a lot of ways into further places with his career that I didn't think he was capable of going. I gotta say, before we get into the thick of the review, this is this is a surprising movie for me to go see. I was surprised by Dunkirk. It was a lot of things I was not expecting. Everything I went in expecting it to be, it was in some ways, but there was another movie there that I totally didn't see coming, and that's what I want to focus the review on. But we'll give some setup first. Let's talk about the history of Dunkirk. Well, the Battle of Dunkirk, if you call it a battle, but it was mainly an evacuation, in particular at this point in the story in France, and the French and the British are basically stuck on this beach trying to escape, and because the water's so shallow, they couldn't bring in big naval boats, so they asked civilians. Churchill asked civilians to come out and get people. So then you have, just your everyday fishermen and sailors and all that coming to get these soldiers off. There was 400,000 soldiers, and I think they were estimating to save 30,000, or the movie presents it this way. I don't know if these are 100% accurate facts. And then they ended up saving like 360,000 men, which was amazing. It was kind of a miracle. And it became this kind of story, the Dunkirk spirit, because Operation Dynamo was the name of that thing where the guys came to save them. And I don't know, it inspired people. I mean, that's what it was. It was kind of this, the country uniting for brotherhood and to help each other. It was this very strong message, one that was carried throughout World War II. And I think America, we can understand that, we can relate to that, maybe like with Pearl Harbor or something. It's different, but it's that same kind of feeling of we have to go fight this evil together. We have to survive together. And everyone's involved. The citizens are involved. Everyone plays a part in this world war. So that's the basis of a lot of Dunkirk, is that it was this, all these guys on a beach. They're getting shot. They're getting taken out by planes, those German planes that are so loud, and they're getting their ships are sinking. They're drowning. They're dying in really horrific ways, and this went on for a long time. So this movie, as a structure, Nolan sets it up as three different timelines going on. There's a mole, which is a week, and then there's the stuff in the sky that's an hour, and then the stuff on the boat, because you follow Mark Rylance and his son and this young kid named George as they go out. They're kind of like the third story, and you follow them going out trying to save some of these British soldiers, and that's called the Sea. So he's cutting between these timelines and syncing them up. It takes you all to see how they're syncing up. He plays them out pretty linear. Like he'll let one scene play out for a while, and then he'll go to the next sequence, and then let it play out for a little while, and then it's a bit into the movie before you go, okay, now I see how this is connecting. But I'll get back to that later. Let's talk about Nolan's filmography real quick. It's funny. I'm a huge fan of Nolan, but I know a lot of people have turned on Nolan, and I completely understand why. See, the Nolan that I'm a fan of goes back to Memento and Insomnia and Batman Begins and The Prestige. That era of Nolan, I think, is amazing. I think that was the guy that I really started to like, who I thought was a director who had a lot of artistry. He had a way of crafting stories, not only that were familiar stories I had seen before, in new, unique ways, but taking genres and twisting the conventions. But there was always a sense of thematic richness and purpose to Christopher Nolan's films in those early days, that he really wanted to say something, or at least, I don't know, focus on something that was important to him. Batman Begins was about fear. The Prestige, I really liked. There used to be a thing with Nolan where he would really go into the physical thing in movies. He'd really go into the details. If you go back and watch Memento, the photograph, the tattoos, a lot of details like that. You watch Insomnia, there's the mirror with the blood, the thing that's broken, with Pacino's eyes, and that carried over. Batman Begins, the way that Bruce puts together the whole Batman arsenal and the Batmobile and his gadgets and all that. And then you go to the Prestige, and he shows you the intricate world of magic. He shows you how magic tricks are done. He goes into some supernatural scientific elements, but it's always a lot of explanation in the physical world, and showing you things, letting the characters live in these worlds where they're explaining these things. But it wasn't so much that puzzle box Nolan got obsessed with, but somewhere around The Dark Knight and onward, he got obsessed with heavy exposition more so than in his previous flicks. Melodrama, going for the emotion, grandeur, real ambition, making these long films. Dark Knight's 2.5 hours. Dark Knight Rises is 3 hours. Inception's 2.5 hours. Interstellar's 3 hours. He started making these films that I think felt separate from those early films. I think if you go back and watch Memento and that, I don't think they're similar. Inception falls in the category more, but like Dark Knight and the Rises era and Interstellar, to me, feel like he was going for something completely different. He was trying to maybe grow into a Kubrick-esque filmmaker with a Ridley Scott, make a Blade Runner or something like that. I'm not sure if that was the right direction to go. I think a lot of people did lose faith in Nolan, because the Nolan I knew was way more restrained and character-driven, and was great at how he framed shots and showed you what he wanted you to see and telling stories in that way. He became less of a visual director, visual storyteller, and he got so obsessed with his plots and puzzle boxes. Not that his films didn't have gorgeous cinematography. They all did. They all terrific visuals. But even the film editing and a lot of the things about his films that were, praised, are the special effects. There was always this feeling of limitation on those few films, the last ones he made, be it that they were held back by their romantic plot and The Dark Knight not being the best or completely engaging, and maybe having a fourth act, the plot not exactly all making sense once you think about it a few times. Inception, over explaining the rules, not just letting them play out, not just showing us things, really telling us how they work. Interstellar, telling us love is the answer, really going into this sappy melodrama, connecting everything way too much, giving way too much of a payoff. Just a really extended ending to Interstellar that brings a lot of the movie down. Dark Knight Rises, I think, has a lot of problems in the same vein. And I was losing faith in Nolan. I was wondering, man, maybe Nolan isn't as... Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that guy I thought was great. Maybe the people are right, the haters, who call everyone a Nolan night and just crap on all of his movies, except for Memento. They usually give that one a pass or something, and then they say he's bad and overrated and pretentious and all that. And I was starting to think, maybe they have a point. Maybe he lost his way. I gotta say, though, Dunkirk is not only a film that proved me wrong, it proves all of those people wrong, too. The criticism of Nolan for years that's been applied to him about his pretension, his need to do overly complex narratives to hide that his films are simplistic, his lack of ability to direct action, to get real natural performances that don't feel calculated outside of like Heath Ledger and Guy Pearce in Memento. A lot of people think Nolan, although I've always found Nolan to be a very good actor-director, his dialogue a lot of people have become critical of. The length of his films. Well, Nolan basically, he stripped all that down. He tore everything down about himself to its bare bones, to its basics. Just like I'd say Spielberg did with Schindler's List, or Paul Thomas Anderson did with There Will Be Blood. I think this is a huge moment in Nolan's career, a turning point, if you will, where he's going to become a different kind of filmmaker, for better or worse. But there is a development here, and I haven't seen a development with Nolan in a while. For a while, it seemed like Nolan had just hit this pattern where he was going to keep making a movie in the same way. And it was going to be... And a lot of people are going to say that about this movie. Oh, he's doing the non-linear thing he's done before. It's never been done like this. That's what I'm going to get into. This movie does this stuff all different in enough ways to really show Nolan's strengths and almost get rid of all of his weaknesses that have accumulated over the years. The exposition dialogue, it's gone. The long running time, gone. This movie's only an hour and 45 minutes, runs at a quick clip. Um, the need to give spectacle and blockbuster over emotion and human elements, and really exploring three-dimensional characters and decisions without just, giving us, letting the characters explain the plot. This movie doesn't do that at all. Everything's told through action. Characters told through action. It's very much in line with Mad Max Fury Road in that way, where a character does something, and that is that character. They don't need dialogue to explain what's going on or who they are. We get what's going on, and by what they do, we get who they are. And I don't think Nolan has done this in years. I didn't even know Nolan was capable of making a movie like this, and I feel like a jerk for saying that, but this really shocked me. I didn't know Nolan could be this restrained. I didn't know that he could do a movie that was told through simple blocking and acting and performance and the camera work. I didn't know, not that his films, like I said, they're beautifully shot and well told, but as great of a director as Nolan is, a lot of his shot choices, in particular, and the way he directs films, nothing super stand out sometimes. It's just really well made and well lit, and Wally Pfister did terrific work. But, I'm not watching it going, okay, I never got that this guy's the next Kubrick or something like that, because it's like, well, shots aren't as interesting. I mean, he definitely has ambition like that, and he knows how to run a studio system and still keep his signature there. But I didn't feel like a lot of Nolan's films recently were singular works. I didn't feel that way with Interstellar. It did feel like a bit of a mix between him and Spielberg. It did feel a little 2001. I felt that way with a lot of his flicks. I did think Dark Knight Rises was a letdown after the other two films. I did think that Heath Ledger's death affected that whole series. There's things like that, but this film. Do you remember the hallway fight in Inception, where the hallway's spinning and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's fighting that guy, and it's like the best scene in the movie because it's the ideas and the visuals and everything perfectly executed in one little 2-minute bit. This movie's like that for an hour and 45 minutes. It's basically the execution of that moment done continuously, where the score syncs up, the themes, the characterization, the situation, and then letting action define the character and the situation, not dialogue. I was astonished. I didn't think that Nolan could do something like this. I really didn't. This goes back to a silent film era. This goes back to works of the directors I really love, like Andrei Tarkovsky. This reminds me of Ivan's Childhood or The 400 Blows. I'm not saying it's as good as those flicks. This isn't like a masterpiece and one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, but it's great. And the thing that's so great about it is that it's very much like an old movie. I mean, I thought of David Lean. I was thinking, those flicks, like old Hollywood. This felt like it could have been made, except for modern day special effects and how Nolan was able to make it. But really, it felt like a movie that could have been made back in the 50s, and it wouldn't have stood out at all. It actually would age just fine as a British film from the 50s. I was very impressed with that. That blew me away. So I thought Nolan is a very modern director. As a guy who wore his influences on his sleeve. You could see the Michael Mann influence in Dark Knight. You could see the Ridley Scott influence in Blade Runner. You could see the Matrix and all that in Inception. This film, his influences are a lot more subtle and deep cutting, and they're not as obvious for your typical film goer. Also, the shot choices. This wasn't your typical Nolan film. He doesn't direct it with a lot of his very clever blocking and close-ups and the way he uses. The way Nolan usually directs a scene in a movie, like say Dark Knight, is just to create the utmost tension or an effect on the audience without it necessarily making sense. This film's a little different. The geography and logic that's being showed to you and what's happening within the frame in this movie is extremely smart and on point and makes sense and is intelligent. I've never felt like Nolan's quite captured the geography and the scale and where this place is and this place is and what this means and this means so well. I mean, perfectly. There's a moment in this movie I won't spoil where somebody kind of is waving their hand and another character misinterprets this. And then Nolan shows you what was actually going on later. And it's maybe the best piece of storytelling Nolan's ever done in a simple way, just visuals. It's such a simple little thing and it's a huge... I mean, to me, that's great filmmaking, that stuff. He takes something so simple, strips it down, makes it work that way, and it ends up having a huge impact on you, and that's how this film is. This film has subtle emotions that build. In the same way that Richard Linklater's Boyhood did, where Boyhood's 3 hours and you're just watching a lot of these things, and then at the end there's this big emotional payoff. That's how this is. This is about an hour and and an hour and 20 minutes of a lot of feeling, of tension, of anxiety, of what's going to happen. The noise is getting you. The sound design is the best. Some of the best I've seen in a few years. They really make you hear those German planes. It's like a razor going through your freaking chest. That stuff's amazing. The ship sinking looks realistic. That the aerial fights are the best I've maybe ever seen in movie history. Certainly since it reminds you of that stuff in The Aviator where Howard Hughes is out shooting and the plane, and it's all real. I mean, it's incredible. Like, it looks like planes are actually crashing and people are actually in cockpits of planes. I don't even think he needed to do this. He probably could have done a lot of this with a blue screen and without actual planes. But man, it looks so good. The pacing too. That's the big thing. That this is Nolan's shortest movie since Following, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's even shorter than Memento, and it helps so much because it's not a character-driven film. It's not a plot-driven film. It's It's about immersion. It's about putting you in that situation. It's about, like, this is you in this survival mode. You have to survive this beach. You have to survive this aerial combat. You have to go save these people in the boat. It's heroic in a very British way, in a very restrained way, where it doesn't tell you up front what's really going on. It's sensationalist. Don't get me wrong, very much. But who knew that Nolan had some poetry in him, that there's a Terrence Malick in Nolan here. There's some Days of Heaven, Thin Red Line stuff here. This is very much a movie that's about soaking up the atmosphere and the shots and what's happening with that, and not a movie about... I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an action film, and it's a thriller, and he builds the suspense, and he said that he wanted it to be more of a suspense thriller in the vein of Hitchcock. There's that ticking clock in the movie that Nolan finds is kind of the way to stay with it, to keep it going, and that keeps building tension, and you get these high levels of tension, and then you get down ease a little bit, but there always feels like there's building, and it's very much done that way in the sound department and with what's being shown to you visually. Everything keeps building and it gets more tense and tense, and then with the score and the plot and everything that's happening, there's this huge emotional payoff of music and sound and feeling, and things that he was setting up throughout the movie through little subtle beats of storytelling that have big emotional payoffs in the third act. This is the first Nolan film that I think I ever got a little choked up, teary-eyed on, ever. Because he doesn't overdo it. He trusts his actors. He lets Mark Rylance give a very restrained, real performance that feels natural. He lets Tom Hardy just be Tom Hardy. He doesn't try to fit them into these certain kind of roles, and he actually puts a lot of weight on his actors. Usually his actors are driven by plot. This film's driven by performances and visuals. So Nolan is trusting these actors to do that, and it shows. It opens him up in ways that I like I said, I didn't think he was capable of doing. This opened him up as a filmmaker in all new ways. He shows a great ability to find the primal nature in things like this. He finds a way to tap into a sensory overload. He finds ways to make scenes change on you, the way you start to think how you would deal with situations. I mean, there's early on this guy's trying to take a dump, basically, and he keeps trying to take a dump, and Nolan makes that so fascinating. And this guy running away, getting shot at by the Germans, and earlier he was trying to take a dump. It's funny and odd, and then it becomes really involving, and you start thinking about how you would if you had to take a dump. And there's a lot of scenarios he twists on you like that. He keeps coming up with all these clever things, like what's it like to drown in a cockpit of a Spitfire? What's it like to go out in a small fishing boat and try to be in a battle situation. What's it like to just try to survive? There's so many clever little visual things. A guy throwing a rope to two guys to hang on to. Stuff that no one's never done this detailed. I mean, it's like these stories are told so well that they all could have been their own movies. I would have watched a movie about Tommy and Harry Styles and the other guy trying to survive. I would have watched a story about Tom Hardy being this fighter pilot. I would have watched a movie about the sailor guy. It's an amazing story about this guy and his son that Nolan tells. It's so emotional and so well acted and so dramatically moving and classic. I couldn't, like I said, very surprising with that whole segment, the stuff with the boat. I couldn't believe how mature Nolan's filmmaking was here, how how it didn't get sentimental, how he didn't like just lean on the emotion, because he will do that. He will lean on the sentiment, and that wasn't. He didn't do the Spielberg Saving Private Ryan thing. He didn't hold your hand and tell you what you're supposed to feel. He just let scenes play out. And he let lies be important. He let people not telling each other things be more important. And there's a moment where somebody doesn't tell another character something, and I think it's a moment when that person becomes a man. And it's a very British thing to do, and I think the pragmatic, to the point, not going to give into the emotions of it nature of this is so well done, and having the emotional payoff being in that way where everyone's trying to just do the work. Mark Rylance saying we have a job to do. That's what it is. That's the attitude of the movie. We have a job to do. But then when it quits being a job for just a little while, and Nolan wraps everything up in the last couple minutes, it's really moving. And I think the last shot is one of Nolan's best shot and symbolic about the battle that's happening there, a raging fire. But that the fight will go on, looking on into the future. And if that fire will go out, what does it mean? And I thought that was just absolutely beautiful, and making everything feel as a whole. The music by Hans Zimmer. This is one of Hans Zimmer's best scores. I have to say, I thought this was one of his best scores in years. Terrific score. Been listening to it like crazy. Very layered, very clever. Makes the movie. The score is necessary to this film. This movie doesn't have a traditional way of being put together, the structure, all that. It doesn't really flow if it didn't have the music. Some scenes would be good silent, some horror sequences and set pieces, but really the music keeps the movie's momentum, because he just kind of jumps around and it's like, hey, here's this sequence, and the music has the structure, and it makes everything work, and it makes the images have cohesiveness that you wouldn't get if they were just playing out. Like, it's a very cohesive movie despite jumping around a lot. And really not being as... I thought Nolan was going to do a lot more with this stuff with some of the characters like Cillian Murphy, but he doesn't. He doesn't do a lot of things with the non-linear storytelling, because it's to the point, once again, to give you this third act that's happening kind of out of sequence. A third act action sequence happening out of sequence. This is a gimmick Nolan's had. And I think a lot of people who are criticizing this movie are saying this gimmick is done here and it's weak, and this film could have been better if it had just been told straightforward, if he'd have just told these segments, these stories one after another. I get what people are saying by that, like a 3-part story, but I think that misses the point of why Nolan did this. Nolan's always wanted to play with time and how we perceive time and how things happen, right? So the timeline for somebody in a Spitfire would be different than somebody in the boat than it would be for somebody in a week on a beach. But when you're living those moments, time, it's kind of timeless. There's not a sense of time, really. Tom Hardy's character is about the only character we really get a sense of time with, because he's running out of fuel and he has to figure out how much fuel he has left. Which, once again, clever little great visual storytelling device by Nolan without explaining things. He lets it be done visually, and that's like, damn, Nolan. Like, really good stuff. I mean, it's great stuff. Also, his shot choices in this movie. These are the most interesting shots he's ever done in his career. Like, the way the shots are framed, the way that things are told. Big improvement over his recent work, which I still liked quite a bit. I still liked a lot of things in Interstellar, but this is a huge step in the right direction. This goes back to the Nolan from Insomnia and Memento and The Prestige. It's like he took everything that was great about The Prestige and a lot of the great things about Memento, and then he stripped it all down and fine-tuned it, and then he gave it like the scale and budget of Inception and his Dark Knight movies, but went back to that old Nolan. This feels like a Nolan movie. It doesn't feel like he's making some franchise blockbuster film. It feels like, oh, this is a Christopher Nolan flick. And it's one of his best movies because of that. Because he went back to basics, which is what he needed to do. And I'm so happy he did that. This story that's, a real historical, it's significant. This story that really means a lot to a lot of people. That story's enough. So he just tells it with his craftsmanship. And because his craftsmanship is so good, and he's so inspired here, and he's so passionate about how he wants to tell this story in this specific way, tonally and visually. It's a tone piece. It's all about setting Moon and Toad early on, and he nails that right out the gate. Because Nolan does this, he ends up making a film that's more impressive than a lot of his other works that people might love more initially on first viewing, or might even be more entertaining. But you have to admire this film more, because what he's doing there is that it's transcendent. He surpasses himself in his typical confines as a filmmaker. He breaks out of that puzzle box in a way that like J.J. Abrams really hasn't been able to, or some other filmmakers. He breaks out of it and makes something that I do think is a work of art. I do think this movie's about time and battle and survival and how we feel about time and how we feel about place and home. And the immersion is, I think, only enhanced by the intercutting. You know, I know some people think that it takes you out of the movie when it cuts to something else and you have to figure out where you are in the timeline because Nolan doesn't explain anything to you. He just plays it out. I didn't feel that way. I thought that the way he did it was, you know, you have a scene of the plane transitioning into something with the boat and they sync up and they're connecting like a thematic idea. And unlike Inception, where it's like, I don't know if some of this stuff needed to be done this way, even though I like that movie a lot, and some of his other flicks, it's like, did you need to do nonlinear approach here and like Dark Knight Rises to this piece of storytelling? I don't know. You know, it's just me. But in this regard, it's like, oh man, wow, I totally get this. You know, because you know, in war, you're getting told these stories, and people tell different stories from different points of view, and they include all these things, and it feels that way. He's telling you an epic huge story with all these pieces, and he could have made a movie out of any one of these storylines, or he could have made a different movie that did have a whole beginning long part before, because this movie just starts and we already feel like we're like in a third act or the end of a second act. Really, he could have done a whole beginning like thing in the first 45 minutes, or he could have done a long epilogue. But really, he looked at movies like Pearl Harbor and was like, everything that's wrong with this film is, which is a lot, is that it misses the point. Like, it loses what these heroes were by not making the battle the emphasis. You know, like, let's just make Pearl Harbor the movie. It's what Pearl Harbor should have been. Pearl Harbor should have just been, like, 2 hours of Pearl Harbor. And you get to know the characters in the battle. And Michael Bay should have just shown you that. It could have been a good movie with a different filmmaker, obviously. And he looked at Saving Private Ryan. And he probably looked at that, you know, really sappy epilogue. But it does tap into that realistic nature of St. Private Ryan. One of my only complaints is there's no gore, there's no blood, and it didn't need it. This film didn't need to be gory, but he shows people blowing up and exploding and getting shot, and there's no blood, and it just looks silly. Like, it's like really old war movie stuff. It's like, okay, listen, when that stuff happens, like with these explosions, I want to see some blood. What sucks is all the other deaths are horrific without gore and blood. There's one death with fire on the water. It's like, oh my god, that's so horrifying. He nails those. Implied deaths, all that stuff. So scary. People drowning. But unfortunately, Nolan doing, like, you know, explosions and big things, he could have just not shown them and let it be implied off camera, which I think would have suited this a lot better if he didn't want to go with an R rating, because not having the R rating, it only hurts this film because he shows you things and you're like, oh, well, that's kind of silly. That would have blood. That's one of my only real complaints. I'm not really sure why he did that. Either, like, go with the R rating and have blood, or don't show me an explosion. I can go with either one. Just pick one. A thematic richness here, though. This opens up so many existential ideas in simple ways, more so than Nolan's films that think they're smarter than this, like Inception or Dark Knight, that are constantly explaining you ideas and themes of what they're about. Always telling you and reiterating the same points over and over and over again. You know what the movies are. This film doesn't do that. It's all done so subtly that everything kind of, like, you start to understand the themes and what he's really doing and saying on your own. You start to figure it out, and you're like, okay, now I get it. And that makes you feel so good and rewarded when you figure things out, and when you start to understand the timeline, and when you start to connect the dots. It makes you feel so involved in another way, intellectually, besides being involved in the terrific production values. I have a hard time saying this guy's name. Hoyt von Hoytame, I think is that. Hoytame is the cinematographer. He shot Let the Right One In, and Nolan's Interstellar. He's taken over for Wally Pfister. This is his best work, and I've been a fan of this guy for years. I could definitely see him winning the Oscar this year. This is terrific. His camera work it's just absolutely amazing. I just can't. I've always loved this guy, and I thought Interstellar was beautifully shot, but wow, the way the camera just moves in this and glides and takes you through these situations and just feels effortless. Like, it's really a miracle. It's a magic trick. Really, this has more in common with Gravity than a lot of people are than Saving Private Ryan, because Gravity was that, let's just throw you into a situation in space. It's about survival. The human elements here, and we're just going to play this out and let the camera work do a lot of it, and the editing and the way we put it together. This film follows that same kind of pattern. The difference here is, for me, it avoids the flaws of Gravity, where Gravity went way too hard to have emotion, and really, and be like, like, it has a character dying. It goes way too much for schmaltzy emotion. And then the ending with Sandra Bullock, I think, is just so over the top with her giving that speech and all that. It's like, I don't need this at all. And I want it to be more introspective. I don't want it to be this big bursting out of emotion and stuff like that. I felt like that was so ham-fisted. This film doesn't have any of that. Like, when it has this emotional payoff in the ending, it's perfect. It's really glance as people give each other, and you get it, and Hans Zimmer's music's doing the work. And it's two guys looking at each other and reading Churchill's speech, and that's even that, not having the speech being, like having Churchill involved in this movie, showing the politics. It's not about that. It's these guys taking it in because they have to fight again the next day. Very Grave of the Fireflies in that way, just putting you in the situation of the people involved in a war. That took it from the situation of like a civilian in Japan. This is from the soldier's point of view. But from a soldier's point of view, this is one of the best soldier stories in the history of cinema. I mean, this really goes back to a lot of the directors that I loved in the New Wave and Russian cinema. And Nolan goes to those classics, and he pulls from inspirations I didn't think he was going to pull from. And he finds a way to make the war film and situations like this in war films feel new and fresh again. And it makes all of his other films seem richer and better, like maybe you didn't appreciate them enough, and it makes him seem like more of an accomplished filmmaker than a lot of people were giving him credit for. And this kind of solidifies him too. I think this is that film where we're gonna go, okay, yeah, Nolan is an auteur, Nolan is an artist. Like I was fighting it for years, but this is the one to me that nails it. Once again, Hans Zimmer's score is a masterpiece. I think this is one of Zimmer's best, because I'm not saying as a score maybe on its own, even though it's great. It's how it works in the movie. Music scores are only there to make the movie better. A movie score is only there to help the film out. That's the point of a score, a good score. And this score is used perfectly to help this film in a way that I haven't seen in a long time. Like maybe since Trent Reznor on Social Network, how that really helped that movie. The acting's amazing. I think this is some of the best performances in any Nolan flick. I think everyone's amazing. Like, it's the one time I saw a Nolan flick where I don't find a weak spot in the acting, because some of his movies, there's always one actor or one character I don't like that much, or I'm like, yeah, I could have done without that person. Not here at all. Everyone's amazing. These would be awards worthy performances if they had more focus and time to build, but nobody's doing that. It's an ensemble film. It's a real ensemble film. Harry Styles is even great in this movie. Great. Like, he's really good. Like I said, I think Mark Rylance gives the best performance. His performance is kind of incredible. It's kind of like it's really the meat of the movie. It's the idea of the movie, the unsentimental sacrifice of wanting to do the right thing, the heroic thing, because of your own personal reasons, but not making that who you are and why you are. And and that's really, it's what Nolan needed. Nolan didn't need to. He has his motivations, he has his reasons for doing this, but he just goes out to sea, he goes into that plane, he knows that he needs to just show you these things and not overdo it. He doesn't need to do that Christopher Nolan thing. He needs to trust his instincts as a director. He needs to trust his instinct with actors. He needs to trust his ability to tell stories through the visuals and through the camera. And this is one of his best screenplays because of that too, because the screenplay comes off more clever and emotionally well thought out because Nolan's so good at making the movie. It really doesn't have those flaws and the plot holes and the logical inconsistencies of some of his recent works. It's very, you're like, yeah, a lot of this makes sense. It's not the most historically accurate film, and he definitely gets a lot wrong from what I've read, and there's a lot of things he changes, but that's the sensational aspect of it that really works, because that ties into the aesthetics with the sound design and the loudness and the action and the tensity. This is one of the most tense films I've seen in years. I was entertained the entire time. It kind of lost me for a few minutes in the middle. I think it started to drag just a little bit. I kind of felt like, maybe this could have trimmed 5-6 minutes here or there, or he could have, restructured this. That's it, though. For the most part, this is absolutely wonderful. I don't agree that it would have worked better straightforward. I think it would have been a different movie. Then I think he would have made a 3-hour film that would have done a lot more. I don't think that was the movie he was trying to make. I think you have to take it for what it is. The thing about his film is that it's so good that you would watch a film that was 3 hours. You're kind of this is the Nolan film. You come out and you're like, actually, I would have watched a longer film about a lot of this stuff because he just nails it out the gate. He really outdoes himself here. He's in top form, like just in a directing sense, and in choosing shots, in transitions, in the way he's syncing this up. He's really, I mean, this is like top form Nolan. This is stuff that I was like, wow, this is like the best parts of the action bits in Interstellar, those great set pieces, or Inception and all that, and then it's got the intimacy and the cleverness and the I think the three-dimensional characters and emotion that Prestige and Memento had, and but it's as simple as Insomnia. I mean, it's everything Nolan's ever done. But it's almost better than everything he's ever done. I don't think it's his best film. It's not my favorite, but honestly, if you argued me though that this was his best film, I really wouldn't have much of a debate against you because it really, looking at all of his work as a whole, this really is like that work that is kind of standing out. Taken as a whole, it does demand almost, you drawing comparisons to the great war films or to directors like Stanley Kubrick and Malick. And I don't think it's the best war film ever. I don't think it's like in the even top five, but it's one of the great ones. And it's a punch to the gut, from Nolan. It's so tense. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. My heart dropped so much. I was there's so many sequences here where like water's coming into a boat or something, and it's like, oh my god, it's really, the movie's so repetitive. He's showing you a lot of the same stuff over and over again, and it never feels you never feel the repetition. You never feel the I don't know, you feel like you're gonna get bored or lose track or not care. But and I know some people have said they felt that way. I didn't feel that way. I cared the whole time, and yeah, like I said, I got a little teary eyed at the end. I got emotional at the end, and I thought Nolan earned those emotional beats. A lot of times, I don't think he earns his emotional beats. He just kind of does them because he knows that an audience needs an emotional connection. This film, it beautifully earns those emotional beats, and it's in a lot of ways one of Nolan's most emotional flicks and one of his most optimistic and dark and beautiful films thematically. The argument is that survival's enough. Survival in itself is a victory. Just to live, just to make it another day, is a victory. It's the spirit that lives on after that, and that's kind of a beautiful sentiment that it's not always about winning a battle or the life that came before that or what events set these things in place. It's about who you are in that moment and what you do in that moment that changes you forever, and then that moment that affects your life, and then how you go on from that. But and we all survive, we all live day to day, and this is a heightened version of that. This is heightened realism, but it puts us in the survival. It puts us in the survival movie trope. It puts us there on that beach. It puts us there on those boats, and we, that it's a beautiful idea. It's wonderfully executed. And I was, like I said, I was just impressed. I have nothing but high praises for this movie. I thought I was going to be a lot more critical, but Nolan nailed it. This is one of his smartest movies. This is one of his absolutely least pretentious. Just everything about this was just on point, and I was very impressed. And it made me realize that guy who did make Memento and Insomnia and The Prestige and all that was still around. He's still great. That guy that when I loved Batman Begins, where I was like, man, you reinvented the superhero flick. You finally nailed it. You finally made one that had the things I always wanted. He does that here. He brings it all back home. And Oscar Gold is coming his way unless some films really impress. This definitely feels like a Best Director film coming for him, like Cuarón got for Gravity and Birdman with Iñárritu. This feels like a tour de force from Nolan, and I think he's going to get rewarded for it. He's certainly going to get his first nomination. I couldn't recommend Dunkirk more. It's a movie you could go see with your dad. It's a movie you could see with your girlfriend. She'd probably find entertaining. It's a very male film, and it's a very muscular film and very machine-like. But all those things that Nolan's always been obsessed with, like the ticking clock and the maze-like aspects and non-linear narratives and puzzles and all that stuff and chess games, that all just services the material here. It makes this movie better. It doesn't take anything away from it. For the first time in a long time, Nolan's film is better because Nolan made it. It feels like the film that his whole career was building up to in a lot of ways. A really nice signature piece of filmmaking that stands as a piece of filmmaking more than anything else, and that's That's what people are going to respect about this the most, and I couldn't be happier for Nolan. I can't wait to see what he does next, and I hope he stays with this kind of pattern where he's willing to do something different, be it in the genre it's in, the length of the movie, how much dialogue's in here. He actually shows that he has a lot of talent that and in other ways that I didn't even think he had talent in, and I want to see him explore those things more and go down that path more. Like I said, beautiful last shot. Performances are great across the board. Cillian Murphy, Tom Hardy, everyone's great in this. Terrific cinematography, the best I've seen so far this year. Best sound design I've seen in a long time. Amazing score. I thought had a great story structure and a great payoff. And there's kind of a lull in the middle. It's not always perfect. You maybe want more here, less there. But it is what it is, and it does give you a sense, at least more than any other film I've seen, of what it's like to probably be sitting there bored thinking about dying. It's very interesting. So my arbitrary rating, I have to give Dunkirk a 9 out of 10. And leave your opinion in the comments section. Like and subscribe. And guys, please rewind your VHS tapes before you take them back to the store.